Okay, we're going to begin our discussion of the Constitution of the United States and the things that surround that. First thing to understand are some of the philosophical precursors, in particular the social contract theory. The two main individuals that were involved in the social contract theory are going to be two guys by the name of Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. Social contract theory made simple, according to Hobbes, is that there's an agreement between the ruled and the rulers, those people with power and those people who don't have power. The agreement is this, that the purpose of government is going to be to protect your natural rights, things such as life, liberty, property. So you give up your total freedom. You give up the ability to do anything you want in the state of nature in exchange for the protection of the government, and the government will protect your natural rights from those that would want to take them away. So in the totally free state of nature, according to Thomas Hobbes, everybody can do essentially what they want, when they want, how they want. They are restrained only by the physical laws of nature. If that's the case, then according to Hobbes, life is nasty, short, and brutish, because people end up violating each other's rights. So what you do is you give up this ability to do whatever you want, and the government will protect you from individuals who would deprive you of your natural rights. However, Hobbes, in Hobbes's view, if the government doesn't do its job, or the government actually is the one that's abusing your rights, then you really don't have an out. You're pretty well still locked into the contract. You still owe the government your allegiance. This is going to be a little different than Locke's view, which is that the contract has been broken. John Locke held that the contract, the agreement, the compact between the rulers and the ruled, if it was broken, then the people that were ruled would owe the government no more allegiance. This is going to become the basis for the American Revolution. In fact, it'll be manifest in a document called the Declaration of Independence. So when Thomas Jefferson writes the Declaration of Independence, he's going to rely heavily upon the work of John Locke. Again, Locke's idea is similar to Hobbes, other than the fact that if the agreement is broken, if the government doesn't do its job, or the government abuses its power, then you owe the government no more allegiance, and you can institute a new one if you will. Let's take a look at the Declaration of Independence. Perhaps the most cited part of the Declaration of Independence is going to be the second paragraph, also referred to as the preamble. And this is where the Second Continental Congress lays out its objections to British rule, and this will become the philosophical justification for the American Revolution. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In this phrase, Thomas Jefferson is lining out the idea that you have unalienable rights. You have natural rights that are granted to you by a creator God. This is an important distinction that sometimes people will miss. The government doesn't grant your rights. The government's job is to protect your rights. The rights that you have, life, liberty, property, to quote Locke, are granted to you by creator God. You don't have to do anything to get them. They're not given to you by the government. In fact, the job of the government is to protect these rights. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So the purpose of government is to protect your rights, and governmental power comes from the consent of the governed. It's not a divine right situation. The government has only those powers that you have given to it, okay? That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. So if a government fails to do its job, then it is the right of the people to change the government or to get rid of the government, and then to put into place one that they believe is going to work better for them. So nothing's set in stone. Governmental power comes from the consent of the governed. The purpose of government is to protect your natural rights, those things being chiefly life, liberty, and property. Okay, the first governing document of the United States is going to be something called the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation created what it referred to as a firm league of friendship. So in essence, sovereignty is going to be maintained by each of the states. Okay, so each state can come and go as it pleases. Again, I want to emphasize sovereignty is held at the state level. You can think about it this way, that when the Declaration of Independence is approved and the fight for independence ensues, one country wasn't created. Rather, there were 13 countries that were created, each separate and distinct. Although for practical purposes they agreed to work together because otherwise they probably wouldn't have been too terribly successful. But each state was free and independent. So the Articles of Confederation was a framework with which the states would work together, but sovereignty was preserved at the state level. There were a few powers that were given to the national government. Primarily, the job of the national government under the Articles of Confederation was to regulate foreign policy, which principally meant make sure that the British were defeated and that they didn't come back, and to make sure that the national government was effective. Okay, so under the Articles of Confederation, there were a few powers that were given to the national government. Primarily, these powers were in the area of foreign policy and defense. Beyond that, most all other decisions were going to be made at the state level. The Articles of Confederation primarily failed to provide some sort of strong order. I mean, while they were successful at prosecuting the war with the UK, they still did not provide a strong framework upon which the government, the society could grow. For example, there was no power to regulate interstate commerce. Regulation of interstate commerce was at the state level. So every time commercial products moved from one across the boundary, taxes could be imposed. One state could prohibit products from another state, and this tended to have an adverse impact on the commercial life of the country. There is no single executive. Unfortunately, most textbooks will state that there was no executive. This isn't quite correct. There were individuals who were assigned specific functions under the Articles, so as such they were executives. What there was not a separate executive branch, nor was there a single overarching executive, such as a president or a prime minister. So there was no individual who would provide leadership or vision. There was no power to tax, so the government under the Articles of Confederation did not have the power to force individuals or states to generate revenue. So while the Articles of Confederation government could borrow money, it lacked the ability to tax to produce revenue that could be used to pay off those debts. Supermajorities were required to change anything in the Articles or any laws that were made under the Articles. For example, under the Articles of Confederation, to pass a law required 9 out of 13 states. To amend the Articles of Confederation would require all 13 to agree. And while these might seem to be admirable goals, I mean, you definitely would want as many people to agree as possible to a change, in actuality they ended up being unworkable. Furthermore, by requiring supermajorities, that is the antithesis of majority rule. Let me explain. If you believe in majority rule, then 13 states, a majority of which would be 7 states out of the 13 should be necessary to pass a law. However, the Articles required that it be 9 states out of 13, which meant that a majority, 7, would have been thwarted by a minority. Another problem of the Articles of Confederation was no national judiciary. There was no national court system. So the interpretation of national policy and national law was effectively in the hands of state judges who were selected by state legislatures or elected by state populations. So their loyalty was primarily to their state rather than to the national government. There was also no power to set monetary policy. So while the national government could print money and coin money, states could do this as well. What resulted from this is that some states were able to hyperinflate their money system and devalue their currency to provide aid to the debtor class. This was one of the problems that was particularly burdensome on wealthy individuals, because effectively the amount of their loan was being devalued. The kind of the icing on the cake of the failure of the Articles of Confederation was Shays' Rebellion, where a group of angry farmers sought to revolt against the government, and the national government effectively or almost lacked the power to suppress the rebellion. This, together with other commercial problems, created a situation where the mood was that the Articles of Confederation had to be revised.